So now it should be recording. So it's Billy Bob here again, and I am with world-renowned Chinese expert Godfree Roberts. For those of you that are not familiar with Godfree Roberts, he is a prolific China expert. He's out of Thailand, I believe, but he has really he recently wrote a book on China, and we're going to get into that. He also has a weekly newsletter that's really tremendous and informative. But yeah, he's a real expert in China, and personally, I have just learned a tremendous amount from reading his articles and really exposing the false Western narrative about China is the best way I can articulate it. So, but without further ado, he's gracious enough to come on and talk to me, and we're hoping to just hear his perspective on the big, huge geopolitical shifts that are taking place. So Godfrey, that's a very inadequate intro, but I hope you can work with it.
That's as good as I've had for a long time. Thanks. Okay, big things. Let's jump in. We're seeing you can look at this lots of ways, but let's look at sort of the PR thing, because that's how you and I met, and that's how everybody who's watching this is kind of plugging in. We're not in China. We are not the president of China, or we're not Mr. Biden. We're just listening to the gun sounds in the distance. But if you look at when I started becoming aware of China in 1961 over the Tibet issue, the lies were already coming down, like Niagara, because I was fired from my first job in 1961 for defending China's resumption of its Tibet rule. And vilified, like no more jobs for you, boy. So this story, has a long, and apparently it began in the 40s. So anyway, the anti-China campaign is a long one, and I figured in modern dollars, just the PR side of it, not the operations side, bombings and stuff like that. Just the PR has cost about 100 billion in modern money since 1941 or so. A huge investment, immense amount of money, thousands of journalists, all kinds of opinion makers, foundations on. So we all know that mechanism now. But the funny thing is that it screwed us. We now on our third generation, Jake Sullivan and what's his name, the White House crowd, they're kids. Their fathers, their grandfathers started this bullshit knowing it was bullshit. Their fathers carried it on, sort of, knowing it was bullshit but not caring. These idiots think it's true. That's the tragedy. We've talked ourselves into irrelevance, really. Our last relevance is some technology from the 80s, which is the chip technology and the IP that protects it, which is fair enough. That's the family jewels. But when that's gone, everything's gone, really.
So 100 billion, yeah, that's a tremendous investment, and it's kind of paid off. I mean, I don't know what else they would do with all that kind of money, but it's really paid off in an awareness and understanding from the general population that is totally confused, especially with regards to China and what is actually going on, in the world. So what?
Yes, what I would just add to that is that it's not only made people confused, because the internet is really only starting to kick in now. It's really starting to get into the cellular structure of the world. It's taken a long time. We take it for granted that, because we're so damn hip, but that's not the case. Most people are just, now soaking into it and starting to find sources of information that are good and solid, that provide an alternative to the narrative. And you know what, we're down to what, 24% trust? I saw the American Publishers Association paid for a big survey of trust in the media. It was 6%. 6%. As the Publishers Association said, it's lower than Congress.
I was going to make that remark. It sounds even lower than Congress, which is very low.
Yeah.
So, and that's what is motivating people like myself to try and, make a difference and to fill in the spaces where the mainstream media has totally failed us. And it hasn't really failed us, right? Like, it's designed to misinform us. It's doing its job, for, its institutional job as an institution of the ruling establishment. It's furthering their interests. But so really, since the Ukraine war started, the online has really taken off, and I think there's probably more people watching people like us than there are watching CNN and Fox News, and I think that's a good thing. But it's really important to get out the correct information, and honestly, when it comes to China, it doesn't get any more correct than the wealth of information that you have, Godfrey. But so what has taken place recently? So China, they were under an embargo since 1949, and they weren't allowed to trade on the global economy. So it took Mao and Inlao. What's Inlao's first name?
Joe.
Mao. Yes. So they ultimately got Nixon and Kissinger to end the unilateral embargo and to recognize the Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party, CPC. It's not CCP, it's CPC. But so to recognize them as the authorities in China, and to allow them to engage in the global economy, and that was a tremendous benefit. And of course, Deng ended up building on that opportunity, and it's really been incredible. And I think I kind of think the same thing would be possible for Cuba, for North Korea, if the West ended their unilateral embargo of those countries as well. They would have just as much success, I would like to think, as China has had. But that opportunity isn't afforded them. But so the hope was to subvert China, to take it over politically, to weasel in through the economic system and take over politically, and to make sure that it's a puppet government like all the other puppet governments that really does the interests of Western capital, essentially. But that over the past couple of decades, it's been dawning on the West that strategy isn't working. And so now they find themselves in a bind, because China is just growing tremendously, and they are not allowing themselves to be politically subverted. So that's kind of my articulation of the last couple of decades. What you probably have some more insightful things to add to that narrative.
Well, yeah, I mean, to sort of carry on your point to what it delivers, to give you an idea of how far reality has diverged from the narrative. I was doing some math last night, as I nerdily do, to figure out what it would take to sink a carrier battle group in the Pacific, in the West Pacific. What assets China would need to assemble. And it turns out it needs exactly one boat. Just one cruiser, Type 55, can sink an entire battle group of 11 ships, including an aircraft carrier, without ever coming in range of the aircraft carrier, the aircraft, its ships, or its missiles. And then, get this, it could go on and sink another fleet without running out of stores or fuel, and then another one. And they'd still have spare missiles and torpedoes left, never coming in range of American weapons. So in other words, I'm probably exaggerating and I'm being militarily naive, but you get the picture. It's an order of magnitude. We're so deluded, as I think we were in Korea, remember MacArthur? Oh, the Chinese, we'll just march up to their border and they wouldn't dare attack us. Well, God, that was the most humiliating defeat in modern history. And it would be much, much worse today. Oh, it would be horrific. It would be over in hours. Every base would be gone. All those famous, by the way, just think of bases as hostages, because China can take them out one at a time or all of them. And what is America going to do next? Where will America strike? Is it going to give up, lose Seattle because of Guam? Not a chance. It's really stuck. It's overextended financially, militarily. It's technologically outdated. It's really a big bind. Jeffrey Sachs, that guy who's been on, the professor from Yale, says, we're in serious trouble. He keeps saying that. We're in serious trouble. And everyone's, yeah. Oh, we are. We are so far down the road. When the year is finished and Xi and Putin have done their little dance, by the way, speaking of Xi and Putin, have you seen that picture, my favorite picture of Xi and Putin being big bros together and high-fiving? Have you ever seen that shot? It turns out—
I don't know about the high-fiving. I know they have a very tight relationship, and
yeah. I'll see if I can put it up for you. Oh, I just sent it to you. But it's a very cute picture. And and I like to study the body language of people like this. And if you study this particular picture, you'll see that she is a genuine fan and really looks up to Putin, because he knows what it took, to get the country back on its feet. His dad did that. And he knows that's a heroic effort. And he didn't have the whole Communist Party helping him either.
Yeah, no, that's very interesting. I've always kind of thought of, Xi a little bit older than Putin, but I see what you're saying as far as from the big collapse when Jeffrey Sachs actually was part of that free market shift that happened under Boris Yeltsin, which was traumatic. I mean, life expectancy plummeted by half a decade. It was a disaster. It was a catastrophe. And and then Putin, nationalized the oil and gas sectors, and he stabilized the economy. And quality of life has really improved tremendously in Russia thanks to Putin and his policies. And so that's why he is a super popular president, and that's why he's got total support from the Russian people. But and then again, the West just demonizes him constantly and lies about him. And it's anybody that believes the Western media, you're just being naive.
But by the way, I have a bit of gossip. I'm sort of out of gossip because I live in the hills of northern Thailand, but my local yoga studio, one of the people who attends regularly is someone who sees Mr. Putin every week and has done for 22 years, a professional relationship. And so she comes over 2 or 3 times a year for a month at a time when he's off doing something else. And so anyway, she's met his ex-wife, and knows the girls, and they met when he was vice mayor of St. Petersburg. And anyway, she said he's a real sweetheart of a guy, very, very modest. He said he really doesn't like public life at all, has no interest in it. Great sense of humor, very straight and very polite, very, very good manners. You know, exactly what you would think for a guy who's got a PhD and 3 black belts, you know, like, come on. I knew a guy with a PhD and 1 black belt, and he was a formidable human being. But this guy, anyway, back to China. The other thing, and this is something I noticed that you've pointed to before, China has been weaving a web of, not alliances, we've not quite seen anything like them before, but the Belt and Road, and BRICS, and RCEP, they all are functional. They all bring benefits to their members, and, you know, trade benefits and diplomatic and all kinds of stress benefits. They all seem to be very alive. I was surprised, like BRICS seems to really come alive. I don't know why. RCEP, I live in the RCEP trading group, which is Southeast Asia, which is the largest trading group on earth. And it's wonderful. I mean, I just started using it 6 months ago, but I get stuff overnight from China, you know.
Wow.
It's just incredible. My standard of living has gone up dramatically. You know, they're doing a lot of that stuff. The SCO, which nobody in America has ever heard of, it's got 4 nuclear, it's a defense pact with 4 nuclear powers in it. There's nothing else like that on earth. And I think what we're going to see, in fact, I can see what we are seeing, is they all start to bleed over into each other and hook up in different ways. Thailand, for some reason, does that all the time. Thailand is a member of everything. It's a member of the RCEP, ASEAN. It's a member of the Eastern European Economic Community. It does digital currency trading with Beijing, all sort of in the background. It's like, if Thailand can do it, then there's a whole raft of countries, you know, that can manage that kind of stuff. So Thailand is in it up to its waist, but it's being quiet because the Americans are very strong here and try to overthrow the government all the time. So you have to be careful. Another piece of gossip.
Brian Berletic recently was discussing the upcoming elections, and, you know, he said the same thing. You know, the West has their puppets in place, entrenched in Thailand, and it's no easy task to deal with them. So, you know, the soft power apparatus of the State Department is you know, is powerful. Godfrey, you have been touching on some things, you know, that I want to expound on. I want to flesh out. So it's like the inevitability of China's winning, of China's ascendancy, and the fact that the United States has no options on the table to do anything about it. So I think we really need to hit that home, Godfrey, because I mean, you touched on it, and I didn't really. I want to really sink our teeth into this. You know, so I mean, you mentioned, you know, militarily, there's not really a military option to contain China, to defeat China, and economically, right? There's what the U.S. I think could do is they could, you know, really just hurt themselves. It would be suicidal in one sense, in a vain effort to hurt China, and they could hurt China, but I think they would be hurting themselves even more. You know, can you talk more about, you know, just the lack of options that the West has, and this, you know, I mean, it's already been decided. This has already been decided. It's probably been decided about a decade ago that China is going to ascend and the West is going to descend. But can you want to touch on that?
Okay. Well, you know, I just published an article called Biden's Zugzwang, which is a chess term, means you're left on the board with all your options stink. Everything leads to defeat. You've got options, and they all bad. And that's the situation America appears to have backed into very, very aggressively, very loudly. You know, this didn't happen accidentally, where it's facing defeating Ukraine, for example, which with Xi and Putin broing again next week. And by the way, you notice that Xi is flying over to pop in to see Putin, crossing the longest landmass on Earth. I've made that trip, and it takes forever just to see his buddy and let everybody know, hey, my buddy. That's heavy shit. You know, these guys, they know how to play this stuff. They've been doing it for thousands of years. So anyway, we're left with the choices of allowing Ukraine to completely collapse and being stuck with the costs because they're white people. We can't have hungry white people wandering the streets. So we're going to be stuck with hundreds of billions every year forever. Whereas before, we didn't have to spend anything on Ukraine. Then they're faced with the, you know, there's a certain point. Everything, these threats are sort of losing touch with it's like something being carried away on helium balloons. You know, those movies where the little boy gets lifted and carried away, hanging onto the balloons. Well, the White House is in that situation. They're clinging to this narrative, which is, you know, more and more dangerous and destructive every day. They've got no backup, no plan B, no fallback. If, you know, resources are getting low, people are starting to, you know, wonder just how steady the economy really is for the long haul. And you know, there's a lot of factors at play there. But, you know, Ukraine will be a crusher. That's going to be crushing, because Afghanistan's only a few months ago, you know, so it's going to be hard to take. We're going to see China add $2 trillion to its GDP this year. To give people an idea of what that means, there are only 6 countries in the world with a GDP more than 2 trillion. So it's growing by staggering amounts.
Yeah.
People don't understand that.
You know, that's what I was just going to say. Like, I mean, really, I have come to an appreciation of those facts, again, from reading your articles that really explain it in minute detail. And you're absolutely right. You know, people don't get it. Like, people do not know what is going on in China. I mean, and how amazing it is, and how exciting it is for humanity, really. But that truth is just nowhere to be found in the Western consciousness, and it's too bad. You know, you mentioned the economy in the U.S., and, you know, we're seeing some banks collapse now, and we don't know. I mean, just today, the stock market is tanking. These banks are in bad shape. They actually stopped trading because they were taking so fast. So they didn't allow any trading to kind of slow the you know, the trajectory. And we'll see. But it's, you know, it's what one would expect, you know, to happen with an empire in decline and overreach.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
So the $1 million question is, what is the West going to do? You know, that's it. What are they going to do? I think I know what they should do. What they should do is, you know, just in their desire to continue to maintain global hegemony, they should acknowledge and accept other sovereign states and stop trying to dominate them and the whole world, and work together in peace and mutual cooperation to, you know, help develop humanity and advance us into the rest of the 21st century. I mean, that's what needs to happen. We need to grab China's coattails and write them for all they're worth, and that's the best thing that could happen for the American people. But how are we going to get that shift? How are we going to get the ruling class in the West to agree to a huge polar shift in their approach? It's not going to just happen overnight. And how close to the brink of some kind of World War III type scenario, before they make that shift? So these are the $1 million questions. And
I would say that what the West does will be determined by our elites, as it always is. We like to talk and vote and opine loudly. It doesn't make any difference at all. No, it's total nonsense. And this has always been the case in all Roman governments for thousands of years. So Joe Biden and the silly politicians are front men for the people who make the decisions. And it comes, I think, fundamentally down to old money plus new money. But old money is used to this game. And that's why people always pick on the poor old Rothschilds, because they're an easy target, but the Wallenbergs are older and richer and far more ruthless than the Rothschilds, and then blonde Swedes. It's old money. It goes back hundreds and hundreds. In Italy, it literally goes back thousands of years. And here's a hopeful scenario. China has about 500 billionaires who are members of the Communist Party. It has another 100 billion who decided not to join, that they just bugger off. So anyway, 500 billionaires. They can all hop on their jets, and probably are doing this anytime, and fly over to Europe and bankroll the Rothschilds' new family museum or a hospital, scholarships for the Wallenberg charities, etc., etc. And along the way, point out the fact that, hey, you'll do much better if you're friendly with China than if you're friendly with the United States, because the United States is going to fuck you. Everyone knows that. It's inevitable. Come on, be sensible. And these old dudes are not stupid, and they have good advisors, and they've been doing business with China and in China for a long time. So there's a ray of hope there that they'll just put the word out, like, listen, dickheads, shut up. At least Europe will start to form its own opinion. If it wants to stay together, it's going to have to cross this, this divide in its own way.
So no, that's great. So there's the inevitability of China's ascendancy that's unstoppable, and I think the Communist Party of China. I think I said it right this time. The Communist Party of China. I think they see it as their responsibility to humanity to manage this big global shift in a way that doesn't result in global economic collapse and World War III. So I think you could be exactly right in how they decide to manage that shift. And I think Putin and Xi are the adults in the room, and they're having to deal with these toddlers, like you described them, in the U.S. that are hubristic, are terribly hubristic, and they don't know. They're just detached from reality, really. And at some point, that can have very dangerous consequences. So Putin and Xi understand that, I believe, and they're managing the situation to have the least amount of fallout, economic, military fallout possible going forward. And I'm optimistic. Like, I totally believe that they're gonna be able to do that, because ultimately the West is not suicidal. They have no interest in destroying the planet. They're gonna get whatever their best offer is on the table, and I think they can definitely come to an arrangement. We're just so far from that point right now, but for sure going forward, as history begins to manifest or reality begins to manifest itself in an undeniable way, this huge disconnect that currently exists is not going to be sustainable.
I agree. No, remember, it's not so much where we actually are, is where we are rhetorically. There's nothing, there's no military threat that Russia or China can't swat down in a matter of minutes, anywhere on the planet, anywhere, anytime. That's not a problem. And it's just that this crazy old Biden and his dreadful 7 dwarves have been hysterically shrieking basically for war, and the Western media, against China and so forth. They've cranked up the rhetoric. But the actual matters are going along fine. And if they stop the rhetoric and, as you say, turned around and said, well, okay, how do we make this work? I think, you can solve most of the problems in an afternoon. It's not brain surgery, that stuff. It's stupidity that got us into it. But I've never seen an empire do that. The only one I've seen was Russia, which is extraordinary, but then it was communist. But the idea that an imperialistic empire would just fold up its tent and say, well, I've never seen that happen. They usually go all the way to the end and destroy themselves.
Let's hope not. Let's hope not for everyone, everyone's sake in the West. So I think we did a good job of looking at the macro analysis. What do you think about? I think China has demonstrated with this initiative with Saudi Arabia and Iran. I think that's a small illustration of the kinds of global leadership that is possible once the West has no longer is no longer a global hegemon, and isn't able to pit start proxy wars and pit governments against other governments, etc. So that's such an imperialistic and zero-sum approach, which is typical of Western imperialism for hundreds of years. But that isn't the only way, right? Like it doesn't have to be like that. Things don't have to be that way. And I think China is demonstrating a superior approach to global governance, and really, working with Saudi Arabia, earning their respect, and negotiating this tremendous peace deal, for lack of a better term, that is just at the beginning stages, but it has a lot of potential. So do you want to talk about the differences of when China is no longer having to deal with the zero-sum approach of the West, how they might do more things like this to to benefit humanity, really?
Yes, in fact, I'm trying to find a great quote. Oh, here it is. About hegemony, being a hegemon. Here's a quote from Mencius, who was Confucius' biggest disciple. Quote, "By using force and pretending to benevolence, the hegemon will certainly have a large state. By using virtue and practicing benevolence, the wise ruler will achieve humane authority, for the humane man has no enemies." Here's another one from Chunji. "Moral leaders whose own states always act correctly will unfailingly attain primacy. States wishing to exercise humane authority must be the first to respect the norms they advocate, because leaders of high ethical reputation and great administrative ability are attractive to other states. And since the domestic determines the international, winning hearts and minds is more important than winning territory. Being compassionate in great matters and overlooking small ones makes one fit to become Lord of the Covenants. Rulers win leadership by acting morally, by presiding over meetings of other states, they earn international acknowledgement of their humane authority. That was 800 years ago, and it's
some timeless truths for sure.
Yeah.
That the U.S., that the West, should have paid attention to, hundreds of years ago when they started, colonizing the planet. So let's kind of inform our viewers. So one of the things that you said is talking about winning hearts and minds, and it's funny because the West has a propaganda apparatus, and they do their best through propaganda to win hearts and minds over to their cause, and they're very effective at it. They've actually done a great job in convincing people that they're the good guys,
Yeah.
and especially in the West. But so they've done professional Western polling has gone on in China, anonymous polling by professional Western polling organizations, scientifically. And when they do the polling in China and they compare the results of the polls in China to the polling that's conducted in the United States, it's really unbelievable how the Communist Party of China has been able to satisfy the people of China, and how they've done so to an extent that's far greater than what the West has been able to accomplish. So do you want to talk about that, or should I spit out some numbers? Because I know I have a few numbers I can spit out.
No, I've got a take on it. I'd like to run by you and see what you think. There are two major streams of governance that have survived. One is the Roman, ours, and one is the Confucian, the Chinese. And their fundamental premises have not changed. Their shape has evolved, obviously. The Roman one has always been about monarchical dominance, about power, dominance, and exploitation of the lower classes by the upper classes. Never, ever changed. Plebeians, peasants, serfs, call them what you will, they haven't changed, and the attitude towards them hasn't changed. And the attitude of cracking their heads or shooting them if they get too, uppity, hasn't changed a bit. So, and that's what we're living with today. They also, for that very reason, that they fundamentally exist to protect the status quo, the elite. That's their job. They really don't. That's always been number one, and human beings have been a distant number two. We think we're more important than we are because we don't realize that our time in the sun was so brief. It was from 1947 to 1978. Basically, that's when the average working person in the West got a good deal, and it's been downhill since then. So anyway, that's been their tradition, and that's hugely important because it's very hard to change something that's almost cellular. Our attitude to government is the same one our great-great-grandfather had. He hated them, he distrusted them, he knew they were liars. The Chinese tradition is entirely the opposite. The only people who are allowed into government, into politics, have to be geniuses, obviously. Duh. And then you must test them morally for years to find out if they're worthy of being given power. And that's basically it. I mean, he was what, village secretary, party secretary when he was 18, worked his way up. His dad did the same. Dad started at 17, and everywhere they went, everybody, when they left, the whole village, would walk to the train station and thank them, and that's the model of governance. That's what you're supposed to do, and that was Confucius' advice. That was Mencius. That advice hasn't changed a lick, and even the sequence. Remember that famous sequence when Confucius's disciple is taking him to visit a part of the country they hadn't been to for a while. And the Confucius says, wow, look, the people are grown very numerous. And the disciple said, well, what should the government do next? Now that, because he said, well, next make them rich. And he said, yes, okay. And then after that, he said, then educate them. In other words, get your sequence right. You've got to get some people and you've got to feed them and you've got to build on a foundation. And his ultimate goal, the foundation that he put down had to include everybody, because the final product is a society in which nobody ever locks their doors at night.
And that's the reality that China has, right? As far as crime like that, I mean, even in the big cities, crime is negligible, and people don't have to worry about locking their doors or locking up their property. So, I had an important thought regarding, but now it escapes me. Now it escapes me. The minute you say something, it'll return.
Of course. Well,
okay. Well, I remember what it was. So
sure.
you were talking about the two different approaches to governance, and again, in the West, it's just the second approach that you described is nowhere in the Western consciousness, and it's replaced. So Western propaganda replaces the reality of that alternative governance that China engages in. They replace that with something that's called authoritarianism. So the word authoritarianism is what is inculcated in the minds of the Western masses when they think of China's government. It's not what you just described, where the entire village is so appreciative of what young Z did in that village, and we're sad to see him go. It's they don't have any conception of that. It's all about China is authoritarian, draconian. There's no freedoms. They crack down. You say that you don't like the government, and you get out of line, and they disappear you, and then and that's why everybody says they're happy.
Yeah.
I mean, that's 1.4 billion people say they're happy because they're all policed.
Yep.
And they would all disappear if one of them said I wasn't happy. So it's just preposterous. So the propaganda is preposterous, and yet it has resulted in a perception from Western mainstream people that, oh, I wouldn't want to live in China. That's awful, because they just have no conception of the thing that you just described. So again, I'm hoping that this can be an informative discussion, and people can think about their preconceived ideas about China. But so thank you for bearing with me while I remembered that one thought I had. Did you have a few others while I was talking? Probably.
Well, I just thought it might be fun to run through some interesting possibilities that are coming up right now, so that people can look forward to, because I think we're in for a very interesting year or two of positive things, like the Iran Saudi rapprochement. That was a big deal. Everybody like, oh, good. There's more on the way, I think. Ukraine, I think, will be good, because that'll be a big. It'll help China a lot, because it will introduce a level of sanity, some level of reality. So the Ukraine thing. Then there's the new reserve currency that's Russia and China have been working on since 2009. That's pretty much, I think it's ready for prime time. I think it's being run in parallel right now in Eastern Europe and China. That's going to be very big. There's the gap between Chinese technology and American technology is widening. That's going to become a little more obvious. People think that because of this chip war that America has a technological advantage over China, or a scientific advantage. No, they have an IP advantage. They filed their patents 40 years ago. That's the advantage they have. But other than that, in fact, the State Department itself said that China is ahead of the United States in 37 of the 44 critical technologies and sciences. So we're going to see some evidence of that. For example, this summer, China will open the very world's first big commercial optonic fab. It fabricates chips that communicate using light instead of electrons, much quicker and cheaper. And it's all original Chinese IP. There's no foreign patents involved, stuff like. So we'll see a sort of a reality therapy there, and we'll see some more, big pennies drop. There's a lot happening that we never hear about.
Yeah.
Most of the big grids, the electrical grids, for example, the national grids, are hooking up with each other. In a little while, all of Eurasia, and Japan, by the way, is included in this, they're hooking up. The whole continent will be able to move power back and forth with the sun. They're already doing it, but they'll be doing it at the continental level. And that's well underway. They've put 15 trillion into it. Just
so as
today.
the sun moves over the continent, that's where they're going to be producing the energy.
Yep.
That's awesome. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So
lots of stuff. I think it's going to be a fun time and a very positive time.
What I'd like to point out with that is you are exactly right. These are the kinds of things that are invisible in the West. The West doesn't hear about them. And again, and that's why I do strongly recommend your weekly newsletter, because your weekly newsletter, you spend a lot of time on, you curate information from tons of sources, and it is so informative and interesting. And you can just browse the headlines and pick an article that you like, but you do a tremendous service to everyone with that newsletter. And with your book and with all the articles that you've put online, debunking Western propaganda. So definitely the link. So that there's going to be a link in the bottom of the video with your newsletter and your book link on Amazon too. But so let's the Western propaganda is so silly. I remember this narrative about, and it's just so bizarre, right? The narrative about the ghost cities. China is building ghost cities nowhere, and it's just so nefarious. Chinese, they're just building cities and nobody's in them. They're crazy. Like that, no sense. And I didn't understand it. And then what I actually did, honestly, I Googled ghost cities and Godfree Roberts because I wanted to know what was going on. And so you had several articles detailing and explaining that, and I'm like, oh, thank you. But if I was just to listen to Western propaganda, I would be so dumb. I would be an idiot.
Yes.
So again, thank you for not, helping me not be an idiot, Godfree Roberts, especially with regards to China. But yeah, you want to just for anybody watching that's heard the ghost cities and is scratching their head, those crazy nefarious Chinese with their ghost cities.
Yeah. Well, the story obviously was that people were sick of living out in the boondocks. Like everybody, they want to live in a nice, comfortable city, but they would have formed slums, as we see in Brazil, for example, and Mexico, would have rushed in. So China put his foot down, said, no, you can't, you're stuck where you are until we can build the cities for you. You're not going to be living on hillsides in tin shacks. So then they started building cities. Well, the peasants in the villages then said, well, that's all very well, but where are the jobs? And where are the buses? And the train connection? Oh, okay. So they go back and they get factories to move there and they promise them that they'll have employees. You can imagine the years of negotiations, telling Hewlett Packard, hey, we want you to move from handy port city, Guangdong, out in the middle of nowhere to a city that doesn't have any people in it. That's the ghost city. They're all full now. They're thriving, of course, and doing fine.
so China has built hundreds of cities from
Yes.
nothing that
Yes.
have more than 1 million people in them.
Yes.
Like, this is the kind of planning and attention to detail and care about the citizenry that is non-existent in Western governance. So
Well, just a footnote to that. My home city of San Francisco is struggling with homelessness. China builds one San Francisco every week and has done that for 40 years and has no intention of slowing down. Every week, plonk, there's another San Francisco. So that's what I mean by trying to grasp the enormity of this thing.
Yeah, it's exhilarating to contemplate it. I mean, it's truly amazing what China is doing, and they can help. They can help Africa do the same thing because they know how. They can help Central and South America. They can help other parts of Asia, and you have the West. You have the West looking at all of that and feeling threatened by it.
Yeah.
They're feeling threatened by that. And they're looking for a way to contain China, to stop China from bettering people's lives.
Yep.
There's no adjectives to describe it. Like the English language can't you know how bad the West is for their behavior. What else, Godfrey? Thank you for, this has been fun. I think it's been informative, but I'm gonna have to stop and actually think. I really should have written some things down because in the heat of the moment, my mind tends to draw a blank. But
that's fine. I think we hit them, all the big points, and as I said, I think the fun is really beginning because it's getting harder and harder to conceal what's going on. And so I think we're going to have a great time. I look forward to it.
Okay, so yeah, let's end on that note. And I totally agree, Godfrey. Like the future is so bright, and thanks to China and the Chinese Communist Party.
Yep.
Godfrey, we're gonna do this again. I'm gonna have notes. I'm gonna be more prepared. We're gonna hit specific topics. So I really appreciate you coming on. I'm going to upload this to my YouTube. I'm going to put your newsletter and your book underneath that. So I'm going to end right now, let me try and end.